The rain fell in sheets, a constant drumming against the windows of my apartment. I stared blankly at the screen of my phone, scrolling through meaningless notifications, anything to distract me from the feeling of loneliness that had settled over me. I had just moved to the city a few weeks ago, away from the small town I had known all my life. I thought the change would bring excitement, new opportunities, maybe even a fresh start, but it only brought isolation. The apartment was silent except for the occasional creak of the old building settling. I hadn't made many friends here, and the few acquaintances I had met were distant at best. I often found myself lost in thought, feeling like a ghost walking through the halls of this strange, towering structure. That night, as I sat in the dimly lit living room, my phone buzzed in my hand, breaking the silence. It was an unknown number. I frowned. I didn't recognize the area code. But then again, it could have been work or a potential friend reaching out. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello." The line was quiet for a moment, too quiet. Then came a soft, crackling breath on the other end. It sent an icy chill down my spine, but I brushed it off as a bad connection. "Hello," I repeated, my voice wavering slightly. The breath came again, this time louder. It sounded like someone was right there, just on the other side of the phone, but there was no one there. My hand tightened around the phone, my pulse quickening. I could feel my heart beat harder, the silence of the room growing more oppressive with each passing second. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice now shaking with unease. Then the voice came. It was faint at first, barely audible, but as the seconds stretched on, it became clearer. A whisper, a raspy, chilling whisper that seemed to crawl into my ears, freezing the blood in my veins. "I know you." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The voice was familiar, so familiar, but I couldn't place it. It was almost like I had heard it in a dream, or perhaps in a memory that was too far gone to recall. I turned my head, half expecting someone to be standing in the doorway, but there was nothing but darkness. "I know you," the voice repeated, this time louder, clearer. It was unmistakable, the voice of someone I thought I had lost forever. I swallowed hard, my mind reeling. My fingers trembled as I held the phone to my ear. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice now a mix of fear and frustration. "How do you know me?" The voice laughed, a low, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate in the pit of my stomach. My grip on the phone tightened, and I almost felt the urge to throw it across the room. "You'll know soon enough," the voice said, its tone almost playful, but the malicious undertone was impossible to miss. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, unable to process what had just happened. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the encounter. It didn't make sense. There was no logical explanation. I didn't know anyone who would prank me like that, and certainly not with such an eerie, chilling tone. I hung up, my hand still shaking. I placed the phone on the coffee table, staring at it as if it might ring again. My thoughts were a chaotic jumble of questions. Who was that? How did they know me? Why did it feel like they were watching me? I didn't want to dwell on it. It had to be some sick joke or a mistake. Nothing more. But deep down, something gnawed at me, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The sound of that voice lingered in my ears, echoing long after the call had ended. I tried to push it out of my mind. I needed sleep. I needed to forget it. I turned off the lights, the dark corners of the room suddenly feeling heavier, more oppressive. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers up around my shoulders. But sleep wouldn't come. The voice, that haunting whisper, seemed to invade my thoughts, growing louder and louder. I didn't know it then, but that was only the beginning of something that would torment me every night for the rest of my life. It started small, little things, a soft knock on the door when no one was there, strange shadows that moved across the walls in the corner of my vision, vanishing whenever I turned to look. I would often wake in the middle of the night to the sound of whispers, muffled and unintelligible, just beyond the threshold of my room. At first, I tried to dismiss it. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild. The stress of moving to a new city, the loneliness, the uncertainty. It was all playing tricks on my mind. But then, the phone call started again. It was the same as before, an unknown number, the same breathy silence, the same voice. But this time, it was different. This time, the voice was clearer. I told you I knew you. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I had been prepared for another prank, but hearing those words, hearing that voice again, made my blood run cold. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. "Why are you calling me?" There was a long pause. I almost thought the call had ended, but then I heard it, soft laughter, like the rustle of dry leaves in the wind. "You'll know soon enough," the voice repeated, "but not yet, not yet." And then, once again, the call dropped. The line went dead. My mind raced, trying to piece together any connection I could. Why was I the target? Who could have known me like this, from so long ago? It was as if the voice was familiar, like a shadow from my past that I couldn't quite grasp. I couldn't sleep after that. The whispers grew louder, the shadows more pronounced. I began to see things that weren't there. Figures standing at the edge of my vision, standing still, watching. I tried calling the number back, but there was no answer. Just an empty, static-filled line. Days passed, and I became a prisoner of my own fear. I couldn't leave my apartment for long. Every time I walked the streets of the city, I felt eyes on me, following me, watching my every move. The feeling of being hunted was suffocating. Then one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the phone rang again. I froze. It was them again. But this time, they didn't wait for me to speak. The voice came through immediately, like it had been waiting. "I'm closer than you think." The words sent a jolt of terror through me. My heart thudded in my chest as I looked around the apartment, half expecting someone to be standing in the doorway. But there was no one, only the empty, quiet room. "I don't know what you want from me," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Please, just leave me alone." But the voice didn't respond. There was only a soft, chilling laugh, before the line went dead again. I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What did they want? Why were they doing this to me? The phone call from the other side wasn't just a prank anymore. It was a warning I couldn't escape. Days blurred together after that last phone call. The rain continued to pound against the windows, a relentless reminder of the ever-present dread that hung over me. I tried to go about my life as usual, working, eating, and pretending everything was fine, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The voice had promised me something I couldn't yet understand, and now I was trapped in a cycle of terror, each day worse than the last. The phone calls became more frequent. Every night, without fail, the unknown number would appear on the screen, and every time, the voice would haunt me with the same cryptic messages. But this time, they seemed different, more sinister. "I'm closer than you think," it would whisper, just like the last call. But this time, the words didn't feel like a threat. They felt like a promise. "I see you." I wanted to scream into the phone, demand answers, but every time I tried to speak, the voice would just laugh, low and guttural, as though it found amusement in my fear. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. The connection, the strange familiarity, was becoming unbearable. The voice seemed to know too much about me, my deepest thoughts, my darkest secrets. It was like it had been with me all along, hiding in the shadows, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I felt like I was being consumed from the inside out, my mind unraveling with each passing call. My apartment, once a place of solitude, now felt like a prison. the walls closing in on me with every breath I took. The shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, as though something was lurking just beyond my sight. Then one night, the call came at midnight, exactly at midnight. I couldn't remember the last time I had slept properly. My exhaustion had become a constant weight on my shoulders, and I stumbled to answer the phone, my fingers barely able to grip the device. "Hello," I croaked, my voice hoarse from days of sleepless nights. But this time, the voice didn't wait for me to speak. "You're not alone," it said, the words dripping with malice. "Look around." My blood ran cold as I froze, staring at the empty room around me. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the walls. My eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that someone or something was there. But there was nothing, nothing but the eerie stillness that seemed to weigh down on me. I could feel my heart racing, the pulse in my throat so loud it drowned out everything else. My hand trembled as I held the phone to my ear. "What do you want from me?" I asked, barely able to choke the words out. The voice chuckled softly, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. "I've been with you all along, waiting." I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "No, I don't know you. I don't understand what's happening." The line crackled, and then the voice dropped to a whisper. "You'll understand soon enough." The call ended, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. But that silence, it wasn't comforting. It felt like a countdown, like something terrible was about to happen. The fear that had been building inside me for weeks finally broke free, and I bolted upright, rushing to the door of my apartment. I yanked it open, but the hallway outside was empty. Nothing seemed out of place, yet everything felt wrong. I couldn't breathe. My hands were clammy, my chest tight. I thought I heard something, footsteps. But when I turned to look, there was no one there, just the echo of my own panic reverberating in the walls. I ran to the nearest window and threw it open, hoping to find some form of escape, some way to clear my head. But the cold air only made things worse. The world outside looked so distant, so disconnected from the nightmare I was living. I was trapped inside my own mind, inside this apartment, and inside this haunting that refused to let me go. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a phone ringing, not from my own device, but from somewhere deep within the building. My blood froze in my veins. The phone rang again. I slowly turned toward the hallway, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if some invisible force was holding me in place, forcing me to listen, to wait for what was coming next. The ringing continued, louder now, as if it was coming closer. I knew, deep down, what I had to do. I had to follow it. With my heart pounding in my chest, I stepped out into the hallway, my breath shallow and quick. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, dimly lit by flickering bulbs. The walls, once familiar, now seemed foreign, their edges blurring in my frantic vision. The phone continued to ring. I followed the sound, my feet dragging as I moved deeper into the building. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning as if the building itself was alive, shifting to keep me from escaping. I could hear the echo of my own footsteps, but they felt too loud, too real. There was something else walking with me, something in the shadows, just out of sight. And then, finally, I reached it, a door at the end of the hall, the sound of the phone coming from behind it. I reached for the handle, my hand shaking uncontrollably, my breath coming in quick gasps. Before I could open it, the door creaked slightly, as though someone or something was already on the other side, waiting. With a sharp inhale, I pushed the door open. Inside was a room I didn't recognize. It was cold, barren, with peeling wallpaper and old, broken furniture. The phone sat in the center of the room, its screen cracked, the call still ringing. I moved toward it, the sense of dread thickening with every step. I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling. As I lifted it to my ear, I felt a cold, clammy hand brush against my skin. "You should have stayed away," the voice whispered. And then it all went black. I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for air as if I had been drowning. The room was completely dark, the kind of darkness that smothered everything, leaving no hint of light. My heart pounded in my chest, a rapid, painful rhythm that felt like it might burst at any moment. My hands trembled as I tried to sit up, the sensation of something, or someone, clinging to me making my skin crawl. I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the dark, but the confusion clouded my mind. What had happened? The last thing I remembered was reaching for the phone in that strange room. But now I was back in my apartment, lying on my own bed. How had I gotten here? I grabbed the bedside lamp and flicked the switch, flooding the room with pale yellow light. The shadows scattered, but my breath still caught in my throat as I looked around. Everything seemed wrong. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky, and glanced around the room. My phone, was still sitting on the coffee table, untouched. But something was different. It was a screen. The usual home screen was gone. In its place was a single, eerie message. "I'm still here." The word seemed to pulse, glowing faintly, as if the screen itself was alive, feeding off my fear. I took a step back, my mind racing. How had the message gotten there? I hadn't touched the phone since the last call. The thought of that voice, that whispering presence, sent a chill straight down my spine. I reached for the phone again, my fingers brushing against the cool glass. As soon as I picked it up, the phone rang. The same unknown number flashed on the screen, the digits glowing in the dark like a countdown to something worse. I stared at the phone, my stomach twisting into knots. Should I answer? Could I risk it? But the voice was already in my head, urging me to pick up. With a shaking breath, I accepted the call. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper, fearful that even my own words might break the fragile silence. The voice on the other end didn't speak at first. There was only the same breathy crackling noise, like the wind whispering through the phone. Then, finally, it came, soft, calm, like the voice of someone you knew all too well. "I see you," the voice said, a cruel edge in its tone that made my skin crawl. "You shouldn't have come back." My pulse quickened, my breath shallow. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice cracking. A deep, throaty laugh filled the line. It wasn't just unsettling, it was maddening. The laughter seemed to echo, filling the room, surrounding me like a dark cloud. "You don't remember, do you?" the voice asked, now dripping with mockery. "I've been waiting a long time for you to come back." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't. "I don't know you," I said, panic rising in my chest. "What are you talking about?" The laughter subsided, and in its place came the sound of slow, deliberate breathing. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing was said. And then, "You should have never left." The words hit me like a slap, and for a brief second I felt dizzy, like the room was spinning around me. I staggered backward, collapsing onto the couch, the phone still pressed to my ear. The voice was inside my head, louder than ever, clawing at my thoughts. I don't understand," I stammered. My hand tightened around the phone as I tried to steady myself, but I could feel something creeping at the edges of my mind. The memory was there, just out of reach. Something I had forgotten, something important. And then, like a fog lifting, it came rushing back. My childhood, my small town, the house I grew up in, and the night my sister vanished. I gasped, the memories flooding back all at once. The last time I had seen her, the way she had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions. The police had searched for months, but there was never any sign of her. No evidence. No clues. She was simply gone. The room around me seemed to close in. My heart raced as I tried to process what was happening. How could this be connected? How could the voice know about my sister? Who are you? I demanded, the words coming out in a desperate rush. Who are you, and what do you want from me? The voice was silent for a moment, but then it spoke again. This time, the tone was different, low, guttural, like it was speaking from somewhere deep within the earth. You already know, it whispered. You always have. I staggered to my feet, the phone still pressed to my ear. I didn't know how I was still standing. It felt like my mind was unraveling, and yet I couldn't stop myself from moving, from listening. I had to know. I had to understand what had happened that night, what had happened to my sister. Without thinking, I grabbed the keys from the coffee table and rushed out the door, the phone still in my hand. My legs carried me through the hallway, down the stairs, and out into the rain-soaked streets. I didn't know where I was going, but I felt like something was pulling me, urging me forward, the same way I had been drawn to the phone, to the unknown number, to the voice that haunted me. It was like I couldn't fight it, couldn't break free from the hold it had on me. I took a left down a narrow street, the wet pavement glistening under the dim streetlights. I didn't care that the rain was pouring down, soaking my clothes. I didn't care that the streets were empty, that no one else was out at this hour. All that mattered was the pull of the voice, the compulsion to find the truth. And then, in the distance, I saw it, the old house. It was abandoned now, the windows boarded up, the walls crumbling. It hadn't been lived in for years, ever since the night she disappeared. The memories came rushing back, her laughter echoing through the halls, the family dinners around the table, the night I had last seen her smiling before she walked out the door and never returned. The voice on the phone had led me here. I didn't know how or why, but I knew now that it wasn't just a coincidence. There was something here, something that had been waiting for me. I approached the house, my hand trembling as I reached for the front door. It was unlocked, the wood creaking loudly as I pushed it open. The inside was dark and musty, the smell of decay heavy in the air. I could hear the echoes of footsteps in the distance, but when I turned to look, no one was there. The house was empty, or so I thought. As I stepped further inside, the phone rang again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I picked up the phone with trembling hands. You shouldn't have come back, the voice whispered, the words wrapping around me like chains. And then I understood. I stood frozen in the darkened house, the words from the voice still echoing in my head. You shouldn't have come back. I looked around the room, the oppressive silence weighing heavily on me. The house felt suffocating, as though it had absorbed all the pain, the fear, and the secrets of the past. Every creaking floorboard, every gust of wind rattling the windows, felt like a reminder that I was not alone, that something was watching, waiting. I turned the corner into the living room, the familiar surroundings doing little to comfort me. The walls, once full of family pictures, were now bare, their frames long since removed. The smell of damp wood and mold filled the air, but beneath that, I could almost smell something else, a faint metallic scent that I couldn't place. The phone in my hand began to vibrate again. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to answer, didn't want to hear that voice again, but it had followed me here. It had led me here, and I had to face it, had to confront the truth. I brought the phone to my ear, my hand shaking uncontrollably. You shouldn't have come back, the voice repeated, its tone colder than before, sharper. But now that you have, you'll never leave. The fear that had been festering in my chest surged once more, threatening to choke me. My breaths were shallow, ragged, as I glanced nervously around the room. Something was wrong, so wrong about all of this. Why are you doing this? I managed to ask, my voice barely more than a whisper. The voice chuckled, but it wasn't the laugh I had heard before. It was darker, more sinister, as if it had taken on a life of its own. You think this is just about you? It asked, amusement seeping into its words. No, you were always meant to come back. You just didn't remember. My heart pounded harder in my chest. What do you mean? I demanded, taking a step forward, though every instinct told me to turn and run. The voice sighed, a sound that sent a chill crawling down my spine. You're here because you remember now. It's all coming back to you, isn't it? A sudden, horrible realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't just come back to the house. This place had always been here, locked inside my memories, buried deep within my subconscious. I had been running from it, from the truth about what had really happened that night, and about the darkness that had been following me ever since. I stepped further into the room, my breath coming in short gasps as everything I had repressed came rushing back. That night, my sister, the disappearance. I could see it now, in vivid flashes. The argument we had before she left the house, the anger, the hurtful words exchanged. I had begged her to stay, to talk things through, but she had stormed out. And then she was gone. She had disappeared without a trace, and I had never seen her again. But now, the truth was clear. The truth was in front of me. And it wasn't just my sister who had vanished that night. I had never left the house. At least, not in the way I thought. The house, this house, had become a prison for me, a place where the past had been trapped, where I had been trapped. And now, with every step I took, I was closer to the one thing I had been avoiding for so long. I moved deeper into the house, drawn by an invisible force, as if the walls themselves were pulling me toward the heart of the darkness. My feet carried me down a narrow hallway, each step heavier than the last. The phone in my hand crackled again, and I held it up to my ear. "Where is she?" I whispered, barely able to form the words, but the voice answered me nonetheless. "She's right where she's always been," it said, its tone dripping with malevolence. "And so are you." I reached the door at the end of the hall, the door to the basement. I hadn't been down there in years, not since the night my sister had disappeared. The basement had always been off-limits, a place my parents had warned me never to go. They said it was for storage, that there was nothing down there worth seeing. But now I knew the truth. With trembling hands, I opened the door and the heavy, musty smell of decay hit me in the face. The darkness below seemed to swallow the light from the hallway, and for a moment I hesitated. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to run, to forget everything. But I couldn't. I couldn't escape this. I stepped down the stairs, the old wood creaking under my weight. The basement was cold, colder than it had ever been. My breath fogged in the air as I moved deeper into the room, my footsteps muffled by the dust-covered floor. And then I saw it, the old wooden chest, standing in the corner of the basement. It was covered in layers of dust and cobwebs, but I knew what was inside. The truth was waiting for me there, waiting to be uncovered. With a shaking hand, I reached for the chest and lifted the heavy lid. Inside was a stack of old photo albums, yellowed and brittle with age. But underneath them, something else caught my eye, a dark, blood-stained cloth. I recoiled, my heart hammering in my chest as I pulled the cloth away, revealing what lay beneath. My sister's body, or what was left of it. My stomach turned as I staggered back, unable to tear my eyes away from the horrific sight. My sister's lifeless eyes stared back at me, the color drained from her skin, her body twisted in an unnatural position. But it wasn't just her body. There were other signs, symbols, markings, carved into her skin. Dark, ancient symbols that I had seen before in my nightmares. This wasn't just a disappearance. It was a sacrifice, and I had been the one who had set it all into motion. The phone in my hand buzzed once more, and I answered it mechanically, my mind still reeling from the horrific discovery. "It's too late," the voice whispered, its tone more triumphant than ever. "The deal is done, and now you're mine." The walls around me seemed to close in, the shadows thickening. My sister's lifeless eyes followed me as I backed away, the reality of what had happened crashing down on me like a tidal wave. "You're too late," the voice repeated, its laugh echoing in the distance. I didn't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by the truth. The phone call ended, but the voice didn't leave. It never would, because the other side had already claimed me, and it would haunt me forever.